Alright, now we're looking at basic program 10. So the only difference between 9 and 10 is now that when both switches are pressed, the motor turns off as well. So this we're going to have to use some Boolean operators in order to work. So we're going to copy and paste the task. So this one's going to be a little bit different. We need to now add another if-else portion to this. But this time we need to say if the limit is pressed and the bump is pressed. In that case, we want to stop motors. And then we could say else if the limit is pressed and the bump is not pressed. And here we can say if the bump is pressed and the limit is not pressed. So this kind of allows us to be a little bit more specific on our conditions that we're looking at. So the first one is if both are pressed. This one's if only the limit is pressed. This one is if only the bump is pressed. And then the last one would be if neither are pressed. And again, that stops the motor as well. So this is a Boolean operator. So when you use the AND, that means that both conditions or both statements must be true for the condition to be true. So if both of these are not true, then it skips over it and checks the next. Or is another Boolean operator. So when you have an or, I'll just put a note in here, or, which is shift and then the button above the enter key where the backslash is. So it's two vertical lines. Or means that at least one must be true. So if I put this here, that would say that if the limit switch or the bump switch is pressed. So that could be one or both or either. So that means if I press one or the other, it's going to stop the motors. If I press both, it's going to stop the motors. And if I press none, it skips that, it skips that, it skips that, and it stops the motors. So that's not what we want. That's going to screw things up. So we're going to use the and. There's also another Boolean operator, which is not. And not is an exclamation. And this just means the inverse. So a 0 becomes a 1, or a 1 becomes a 0 when you use that. So you could say, like in this here, you could say that when the bump switch is not equal to 1. Well, give me a value that the bump switch could be that's not equal to 1. Well, that would be 0. It's a digital sensor. So you might see this notation sometimes where they're saying that it's not pressed. And you could do this. This works as well. I personally like the equal equals 0 for our purposes. It makes it a little bit easier to understand in terms of pressed and not pressed at the moment. But this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to include that code into here. So we're going to add another if. So I've got my condition, and I'm going to put in there, again, open and close. I usually set up my structure first, and then I'm going to put an else in front of this if. And I can go back and fill in my data. And again, I'm going to just copy and paste, because I feel that that's a very good thing. So I'm going to be copying and pasting some of this stuff. And I'm going to keep these organized with the limit switch first, just so it's consistent. The other thing I'm going to do in terms of spacing, see how I can't see the rest of this here? So I'm going to move this to the next line right underneath, so that these basically come out right on top of each other. And it's really easy to see what you're doing. going to do the same thing here. So put an and, space this over, so it's right underneath. Same thing here, and, space it over. So that when I'm troubleshooting, it's really easy for me to look at this. So in this case, I'm going to stop motors. And the left motor again, I'm stopping when they're both pressed. And then the next condition, I want to go clockwise if the limit switch is pressed and the bump switch is not pressed. It's going to go clockwise. And then here, when the limit switch is not pressed and the bump switch is pressed, it goes counterclockwise. So this should be good. Again, you can add your comments in there. I'll leave that to you to update your comments and make those look good. And again, you can always hit Control and then the minus, and that will shrink your font. I'm doing it larger so you can see it in the video, but I would probably have it about this size. That way I can kind of see everything in my code currently. But again, I'll bump it up so you can see. And that's my code. Everything's lined up nicely. I can hit fix formatting, but again, I personally like to move these over so that they're lined up right underneath those sensor values there. Let's do a quick compile, quick download. And let's start. So we'll show the video here of what's going on. Again, if I push the limit switch, it goes clockwise. If I push the bump switch, it goes counterclockwise. If I'm pushing this and I push this, it stops it. Or if I push this and I push it, it stops it. Or if I let go of both, it stops it. So that does exactly what I want it to do. That is BP10.